Hey everyone, it's Technic Builder. So somebody had asked me to go over this chassis maybe one last time before I disassembled it. So here are some of the things I learned when I built this chassis about what works and what doesn't. So number one, when you're building a chassis for a vehicle, you've got to start with the biggest elements, which would be motors. And I did not do that in this case. So if you look at this chassis, and then you hold an extra large motor up to it, you might ask yourself, well, where can I put that motor? And what I learned is it's really hard to stuff motors into a chassis after the fact. I thought it wouldn't be that hard, but that is clearly not the case. So motors, battery packs, those need to come very early on in the design, and that's kind of lesson number one. Lesson number two, I would say, is don't try to reinvent the wheel. I don't have an example of it anymore because I've disassembled all of them. But originally I was using the portal axles, and those were built onto, well, you can watch an old video to see those, but I use these, but not like this. Everybody thinks, oh, you've got to, that's the only way to use this portal axle, is to use two of these, and that puts, oh, come on, focus. There we go. Is to use the portal axle and then use two of these, and oh, then you get a bad steering radius. So I had built something where it actually goes like that, and I built up a frame around it and yada yada. But that would have gotten the steering axis 2 studs closer to the wheel, but then everything else that had to come well, how would I say it? This is only 1 degree of freedom right here. And so the other degree of freedom, the up and down motion, well, that came from this. But because this was such a large structure already, I think it was maybe 5 studs deep, these had to be mounted basically in the very center of the chassis. Or if I show you on the bottom, see how these extend all the way to the center? So that eats up all that space. Anywhere between the top and the bottom A-arms, if you want to call them that, that's all dead space because that has to be taken up by suspension components. So in redesigning the next chassis, the first thing I've done is redesign those, and I'll talk about that later. So that's number two, is don't reinvent the wheel. Most Lego vehicles use a hub somewhat like this, and there's a good reason for it, and because that's the most efficient design that you can make out of Lego. Third, I think the chassis was just a little too complicated overall. Again, there's a design methodology called KISS, Keep It Simple Stupid. And so a lot of the things I did in the chassis were to make it stronger, like the way that these are connected up top. You know, I'd say there's excess axles. It doesn't need to be quite that strong, and it really made assembly quite difficult. Or the use of 2L axle joiners instead of using a straight axle. Okay, like this red one right here. That one, it's the main steering shaft, but it, you know, I probably could have gotten away with just using an axle there. I don't think it would have twisted too much. When you use axle joiners like that through the entire vehicle, it gets really hard to assemble. So in the future design, I'll probably try to keep some things simpler. Let's see, that'd be number three. Number four is gear trains. A lot of people, when they build with Lego, talk about, you know, how much friction the gear trains eventually build up. And I always thought, oh, well, maybe they're just pushing the bushings on too tight, or things aren't braced correctly. Because as I was building this, it was always pretty easy to start to turn the steering axis. But as soon as there's a slight load, or on that axle, not axis, each individual gear, or each axle that each gear is mounted onto, experiences a lot more friction. Again, that's only with a load. Without a load, it's not so bad. So long gear trains, yes, definitely not the best idea with Lego. We're not talking about steel bearings here, we're talking about plastic sliding on plastic. So I think that was number 4. Is there a number 5? That might have been about it. I guess the only other one thing is I had thought, oh, I'll have 3 axles steered per set of motors. So you can see there's one drive shaft through here. It's turning all of those. Those would be all connected to a bank of 3 or 4 motors that go through a transmission. Again, I don't think that's a good idea. With how heavy this thing's eventually going to be, that's just too much stress to put on one drive shaft. So in the new design, I'll have basically one extra large motor per axle, maybe 2. So it would either be a 10 or a 20 motor vehicle. Although it doesn't have to be. I could, in theory, have 2 motors on some axles, 1 motor on some axles, and, you know, it'd be fine. But, yeah, anyway, we'll see how it works out. I'm already playing with where to put those motors in LDD as I work on my redesign. So, here's how far I am with the redesign. We're going back to the wheel hubs. So this hub, first of all, it does not use the portal axles. I wanted to make them work, and, you know, I always thought, oh, with these 3 pinholes, it'll be so much stronger. But, you know, it's really not. These are kind of wobbly, and they just don't provide quite as much support as you would think. It does help prevent the wheel from popping off, but as far as supporting the wheel and making it more rigid, it's really not that much more rigid than just an axle, a single axle that's supported at least at 2 points. So here, let's get really close. This is a different camera, by the way, that I'm working with today. You can see I'm using some Bionicle components on the bottom. These started out very stiff, but since this has been connected for about, I don't know, 4 months, this piece seems to be loosening up. So this really isn't that stiff of a joint. Any friction in this joint, I think, will be far overshadowed just by the weight of the vehicle, the size of the wheels. In other words, the friction won't be that big of a deal. We'll see what I say in 6 months once there's 20 wheels. But so I don't think anybody else has made this exact design. Here's what I like about it, okay? You've got some, oh shoot, what's it called? Steering axis inclination. That's not kingpin angle. I've forgotten all this stuff. What I'll probably end up doing is correcting all my terminology after I make the video. But anyway, with the angle of those 2 ball joints, it's going to get the steering axis, I think, it's going to reduce the scrub radius by getting that steering axis, I think, closer to the turning axis of the wheel. If I go ahead and mount this into a wheel, one thing that I really like about this design is just how close it fits in there. Again, if you were to draw a line from here to here, you know what, that focus is a bit close. If you were to draw a line from there, you can see that, well, that line would extend inside the width of the tire, which is good. Secondly, it still maintains 1 to 3 gear reduction at the hub, which basically reduces the torque by 1/3 through every differential. What else would I say? Some people might say, oh, well, if you mount suspension to this, and, you know, the way it pushes down, it's going to pop this ball joint apart. No, I don't think it is. Those ball joints are quite stiff. And the way that this ball joint is mounted, suspension's not going to push that off. This would only come apart pulling it out the top. Part of what made this hub possible is this piece right here, which is a relatively new piece. There are other ways to make this connection, but what's unique about this piece is, well, it's hard to focus on black on black. What's unique about this piece is it's rounded right here, and that is important for allowing this piece to bend down while still turning. So that was kind of a necessary piece for this design. I do wish that these pins had friction instead of frictionless pins, because that lets it wobble a little bit, but, you know, again, it's Lego at the end of the day. So this is a new hub design I'm working with. As far as the main chassis design, I've been doing some of that in LDD. There's really not that much to show. It's just me dragging motors all over the place, deciding where I want to put them. But the next step for me is to disassemble this, put it behind me. It's a great learning experience. I think it's cool looking. I love gears. That's part of the reason why I build with Technic. But you know, it's not going to work. So that's about it for that, I think. Okay, bye.